They say some places hold on to secrets, secrets that can change a life forever. Today's story is one of love, betrayal, and a truth that refused to stay buried. If you enjoy stories that pull you in and keep you on the edge until the very last second, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the moments that will leave you breathless. And tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from right now? The rain had stopped just moments ago, but the air outside the hotel still carried the scent of wet pavement and sea salt. Through the revolving glass doors stepped a man whose presence immediately drew the attention of everyone in the lobby. He stood tall, his gaze sweeping over the familiar surroundings as if testing whether time had truly changed them. The staff straightened themselves, forcing smiles and polite greetings, but their eyes betrayed the unease his sudden return caused. His black coat clung to his broad shoulders, damp from the weather, and a droplet traced the line of his jaw before vanishing into his collar. Across the lobby, a woman in a simple housekeeping uniform was bent over, wiping a streak of water from the marble floor. She had not yet seen him. He watched her, his eyes lingering, an almost imperceptible shift in his breathing as recognition set in. She felt it before she saw him, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The mop in her hand slowed, and she turned her head. Her eyes met his, and for a brief, fragile moment, the world seemed to fall silent. The color drained from her face. Her fingers tightened around the mop handle. She didn't move, and neither did he. "You," she whispered, her voice unsteady. He closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps, his gaze never leaving hers. "It's been a year," he said. She lowered her eyes, her heart pounding. 1,000 memories pressed against her mind, each one threatening to spill over. But there was one truth she could no longer hold back. "There's something you need to know," she murmured. His brow furrowed. "What is it?" She lifted her gaze, meeting him head-on despite the trembling in her hands. Her voice was steady now. "I had your child." The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. He stared at her as if trying to decide whether he had heard correctly, his jaw tightening, but his expression otherwise unreadable. Around them, the world moved on, guests crossing the lobby, conversations at the reception desk, but neither of them noticed. "You're lying," he said at last, his voice quiet, almost too calm. Her lips pressed together, her eyes holding his without flinching. "I'm not." A flicker of something passed across his face. Anger, disbelief, maybe even fear, but it was gone before she could name it. He stepped back, putting distance between them, as though her words had pushed him. "You expect me to believe that? After all this time? Without a single word from you?" She swallowed hard. "Do you think it was easy for me? Do you think I wanted to see your face again after what happened?" That last sentence was sharper than she intended, and for a second, his eyes narrowed. "What happened?" he repeated, his tone colder now. Her grip on the mop tightened until her knuckles whitened. She could feel the sting of memories breaking free, but she forced them back down. This wasn't the time. Not here. Not with strangers listening. He read the hesitation in her face. "If this is some pathetic attempt to drag me into your problems." "It's not," she cut in. "He's yours." Silence again. This time, his gaze drifted briefly to the floor before returning to her, sharper than before. "Prove it." Her heart ached at the way he said it, not as a plea, but as a challenge. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him everything at once, but she knew that would only push him further away. Instead, she took a slow breath, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I will, but not here." His eyes searched hers for a long moment, as if weighing her sincerity against the bitter history between them. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the elevators, the echo of his steps fading until he disappeared from sight. She stood frozen, her chest tight. The air in the lobby felt colder now, heavier. She had waited a year for this moment, rehearsed it in her mind countless times. But nothing had prepared her for the look on his face, the look of a man who would rather believe in a lie than face the truth. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. She didn't sleep that night. The moment he vanished into the elevator, she knew there would be no rest. The hotel corridors felt endless as she finished her shift, every footstep echoing louder than it should, every shadow holding memories she had tried to bury. By the time she reached the small, dimly lit staff room in the basement, her legs felt like stone. She sat down on a narrow cot, but her mind was already pulling her backward. Into the night, everything changed. It had been late, long after most guests had retired to their rooms. A storm had raged outside, the kind that rattled the old windows and made the chandeliers sway slightly. She had been assigned to clean the private lounge on the top floor, a place rarely used except by the most important guests. When she stepped inside, the first thing she noticed was the quiet, so still it felt wrong. Then she saw him. He was sitting alone in the corner, a half-empty glass in his hand, staring at the rain streaking the tall windows. His jacket was draped carelessly over the back of the chair, and his tie was loosened, revealing a version of him she had never seen before. Less polished, more human. "You're not supposed to be in here this late," she said quietly, trying to keep her tone professional. He didn't look at her right away. "Neither are you." The way he said it wasn't cold or accusing. It was almost tired. She should have left, should have turned and walked away, but something in his voice kept her rooted in place. "I'm just here to clean," she murmured. Finally, his eyes met hers, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. They were the kind of eyes that could cut through you, but that night, there was something else in them. A loneliness so deep it made her chest ache. "Do you always follow the rules?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "I try to." He leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I used to. Didn't get me very far." She wasn't sure why she stayed after that. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the strange magnetic pull between them. They spoke in fragments, about nothing and everything. He told her about cities she'd never see, deals she couldn't imagine, the kind of life that felt like another world. She told him about her son, then quickly corrected herself. About her younger brother. She couldn't explain why she lied. Maybe she didn't want him to know too much. The hours slipped away until the storm outside softened into a steady drizzle. When she stood to leave, he caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough that she stopped. "Stay," he said. Her heart pounded. "Why?" He studied her for a moment, and she could feel the tension pulling them closer. "Because for the first time in a long time, I don't want to be alone." She should have said no. Every instinct told her to walk away. But the look in his eyes, the vulnerability, the quiet desperation, was something she couldn't turn from. That night, the rules blurred. They stopped being the wealthy guest and the invisible staff member. For a few hours, there were just two people searching for something they didn't dare name. By morning, it was over. He was gone before she even opened her eyes, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of his cologne on the pillow. She told herself it was nothing, a mistake she'd forget. But 2 months later, when she held the pregnancy test in her shaking hands, she knew forgetting was no longer possible. Now, a year later, as she lay on her narrow cot in the basement, the memory of that night burned as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. She had sworn to herself she'd never tell him. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. And upstairs, in the most expensive suite of the hotel, he was unpacking his luggage, unaware that the truth he'd just heard was only the first crack in a wall that was about to crumble. Morning came with the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the lobby, but for her, it brought no comfort. She had barely slept, her mind tangled in what-ifs and half-finished sentences she wished she had said. She spent the early hours avoiding the top floors, sticking to the less glamorous corridors where the scent of bleach replaced that of expensive perfume. She thought she might have bought herself time, at least until he checked out or disappeared the way he had before. She was wrong. By mid-morning, as she was polishing the brass railing along the main staircase, she heard footsteps, measured, deliberate, coming down toward her. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. The weight of his gaze reached her before his shadow did. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. His voice carried the same authority it had the year before, the kind that made people move without thinking. She hesitated, her hand tightening around the cloth she held, but eventually she followed him, each step heavier than the last. He led her past the lobby, through a side hallway, and into a small, private lounge. A room she knew was soundproof and rarely used during the day. The door clicked shut behind them. "Now," he began, his tone sharp, "you're going to explain exactly what you meant yesterday." She straightened her back. "I think I was clear enough." He let out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Clear? You drop a bomb like that after a year and call it clear? Do you have any idea how insane that sounds?" "I didn't plan on telling you," she admitted. "I plan on never seeing you again." "Then why say it?" he pressed, stepping closer. "Why now?" Her chest rose and fell faster. "Because you were here, and because he deserves to know who his father is." He studied her, searching for any crack in her composure. "Do you even have proof?" The accusation stung. "You think I'm lying because it's easier than believing the truth. Or maybe," he countered, "you're hoping I'm stupid enough to throw money at a problem that isn't mine." Her eyes flashed. "If I wanted your money, I could have asked for it a long time ago. I don't want anything from you except for you to know the truth." They stared at each other, a silent battle raging in the space between them. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower this time. "If what you're saying is true, why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I didn't think you'd care," she said quietly. "Because I didn't want to be another woman you left behind without a second thought." That seemed to hit him harder than the rest. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked unsettled, but the moment was brief. He turned toward the window, his hands sliding into his pockets as if to keep them from doing something he'd regret. "I want to see him," he said finally. Her breath caught. "What?" "I want to see the boy," he repeated. "If he's mine, I'll know." Her instinct was to refuse, to keep her son away from this man who could so easily walk in and out of people's lives. But something in his voice, something that sounded almost like urgency, made her pause. "Fine," she said. "After my shift." He turned back to her, studying her again, but this time there was no open hostility in his gaze. Only curiosity and something else she couldn't name. As she left the room, her heart pounded for reasons she didn't want to admit, and she wondered, not for the first time, if letting him meet the child would be the biggest mistake of her life, or the beginning of something she had never dared to hope for. Upstairs in the quiet of the lounge, he stayed by the window long after she was gone, staring at the street below, his mind miles away. The idea that she might be telling the truth gnawed at him, pulling him back to memories he thought he had locked away for good. Somewhere deep down, he already knew this meeting would change everything. The afternoon felt heavier than it should have. She spent the rest of her shift with her thoughts, circling the same point over and over, each turn more suffocating than the last. Her hands moved automatically, changing linens, dusting shelves, wiping mirrors, but her mind was elsewhere, already picturing the moment to come. She told herself she wasn't nervous, that she could handle this. Yet every time she thought of him looking at her son, a sharp wave of doubt rose in her chest. When her shift ended, she went to the small apartment she rented a few blocks from the hotel. It was modest, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, walls painted in a shade of white that had long since lost its brightness. Inside, her son was playing on the living room floor, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he concentrated on lining up his toy cars. The sight of him always softened her edges. She knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. "We're going out," she told him. "Just for a little while." He nodded without asking questions, the way children do when they trust without hesitation. She dressed him in a clean shirt and his best pair of shoes, though both were worn from use. As they stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, stretching toward the hotel like dark fingers. He was already there, waiting in the lobby. The moment he saw them, his posture changed. She noticed the way his eyes moved, first to her, then to the boy at her side. The shift in his expression was subtle but unmistakable, as though something inside him had cracked. "This is him," she said simply. The boy looked up at the stranger towering over him, curious but unafraid. The man crouched slightly, leveling his gaze with the child's. For a long moment, he just studied him, taking in every detail, the shape of his nose, the curve of his mouth, the way his eyes seemed to hold a quiet depth that felt far too familiar. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy answered softly, his voice carrying the innocence of someone untouched by the weight of adult secrets. It suits him, the man murmured, almost to himself. They decided to walk to the small park nearby. She kept a careful distance, watching as the boy darted toward the swings, then glanced back to make sure they were both still there. The man followed, his gaze never straying far from the child. "He has your eyes," she said, her tone somewhere between an accusation and a confession. He didn't look at her. "He has your stubbornness." It was strange how quickly the air shifted. The sharp edges of their earlier exchanges had dulled, replaced by a tension that was no less intense but entirely different. At one point, the boy ran to show him a small rock he'd found, holding it out with pride. The man took it, examined it as though it were a rare jewel, and handed it back with a small smile. "You keep that," he told him. "It's lucky." When the sun began to set, they walked back in near silence. At the entrance to her building, the boy tugged at her sleeve, then turned to the man. "Will you come again?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I will." The boy smiled, satisfied, and disappeared inside. She stayed in the doorway, meeting his gaze in the dim light. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep," she said. "I don't make promises lightly," he replied. Something in the way he said it unsettled her, but she didn't push. He stepped back, hands in his pockets, and for the first time since his return, there was no anger in his eyes. Only thoughtfulness, and perhaps something even more dangerous, possibility. As he walked away, she realized she had no idea whether his presence would heal old wounds or tear them open wider than before. And upstairs in his hotel suite later that night, he poured himself a drink, staring at the glass without tasting it. The boy's face lingered in his mind, not as a doubt to be solved, but as a truth he could no longer deny. What he couldn't yet see, what neither of them could, was how quickly that truth would pull all three of their lives into a storm they couldn't escape. 2 days passed before she saw him again, though she had felt his presence in her mind every hour. She went about her work as usual, changing bed sheets, carrying stacks of fresh towels, scrubbing the marble until it gleamed. But every so often, she'd catch herself glancing toward the lobby, half expecting him to be standing there. When he finally did appear, it wasn't in the hotel corridors. It was at her apartment door. She froze when she opened it, surprised to find him there without warning. He was holding something, a small, neatly wrapped box in deep blue paper, tied with a silver ribbon. He didn't say hello. He simply extended the gift toward her. "For him," he said. She hesitated before taking it. "Why?" His eyes flickered, as if he hadn't expected the question. "Because I wanted to." She studied him for a moment, searching for the angle, the hidden motive. Finally, she stepped aside to let him in. The apartment seemed even smaller with him standing there, his presence filling the space in a way that felt both unsettling and familiar. Her son appeared from the bedroom, his face lighting up when he saw the man. "I brought you something," the man said, crouching to the boy's level. He handed him the box, and the child's small fingers worked eagerly at the ribbon until it fell away, revealing a sleek model car, metal, detailed, the kind of thing you don't find in a regular toy store. The boy's eyes widened. "It's perfect," he whispered. "It's fast," the man told him. "Like you." She watched the exchange from a few feet away, her arms crossed. There was no denying the boy's joy, but her mind was already spinning with questions. She waited until her son retreated to the floor to play before she spoke again. "What are you doing here?" He straightened slowly, his expression calm but unreadable. "Getting to know my son." Her chest tightened the way he said it, without hesitation, without the defensive edge he'd had before. "And when you're done getting to know him, what then? You'll go back to whatever life you have, and he'll be left wondering why you disappeared." "I'm not leaving," he said simply. The words hung in the air, too heavy and too quick. She searched his face for a sign that this was just something he said in the moment, but he didn't look away. "You say that now," she replied. "But people like you don't stay." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think you know me because of one night, but you don't know anything about the man I was before or the man I am now." Her pulse quickened, though she wasn't sure if it was from anger or something else. "Then tell me, why come back at all?" His jaw tightened. Because I was tired of running from the things that matter. Before she could answer, the boy called out, holding the model car up for them to see. Look how fast it goes. They both turned, watching him race it across the floor. The sight pulled a small, almost involuntary smile from the man. But when he looked back at her, his expression was serious again. I want to take him out tomorrow, he said. Just the two of us. Her instinct was to refuse, to keep control, but she also knew the boy would want to go. She hesitated, weighing her options, then finally nodded once. Tomorrow. But I'm choosing where. He accepted that without argument. Fine. As he left, she leaned against the doorframe, feeling the shift in the air. This wasn't just about a man meeting his son anymore. It was about him forcing his way into a life she had built without him, and her trying to decide whether to push him out or let him stay. Neither of them realized that tomorrow's outing would set in motion a chain of events neither could stop. Events that would bring old wounds to the surface and open new ones they weren't prepared to face. The next morning was bright, the kind of clear sky that almost made the city look clean. She dressed her son in his favorite shirt and made sure his small sneakers were tied tight. She didn't like the idea of him going anywhere without her, but she had chosen the place herself, a busy park near the pier full of families and street vendors. No dark corners, no secluded spots. When the knock came, she opened the door to find him without his usual sharp suit. Today, he wore a simple shirt with the sleeves rolled, the top buttons undone. He looked different, less like the untouchable figure she remembered and more like someone who belonged in daylight. You ready? He asked, his eyes flicking briefly to her before landing on the boy. The child nodded eagerly, grabbing his small backpack. She knelt to look him in the eye. You listen, okay? Stay close. Don't run off. He nodded again. She watched as they walked toward the street, the boy chatting excitedly about the pigeons on the sidewalk and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery they passed. The man listened, occasionally asking questions, his long stride slowing to match the child's shorter steps. At the park, they moved through the noise of weekend life. Children laughing on the playground, the scent of grilled corn and roasted nuts in the air, street performers strumming guitars. He bought the boy a small paper cone of roasted almonds and watched as he devoured them, cheeks full, eyes bright. For a while, it was almost easy. She sat on a bench near the fountain, pretending to read a book while keeping them both in sight. They played a game of catch on the grass, the man's deep laugh mixing with the boy's high-pitched giggles. She caught herself smiling more than once, though she quickly forced the expression away. It was near the carousel that everything changed. The boy was climbing onto one of the painted horses when a voice cut through the crowd, a sharp, feminine voice that made him freeze. Well, if it isn't the man who doesn't return calls. He turned, his posture stiffening instantly. A woman in a tailored red coat stood a few steps away, her lipstick the same bold shade. Her eyes were narrowed, and the smile on her lips didn't reach them. I thought you left the country, she said, stepping closer. He glanced toward the carousel, making sure the boy was distracted before answering. I've been busy. Busy, she repeated, her tone dripping with accusation. Too busy to explain why you vanished? Or is this the part where I'm supposed to believe you didn't know about the trouble you left behind? Her words carried enough weight to draw a knot into the pit of his stomach. She noticed the flicker in his eyes and smirked. Oh, so you do know. He moved a step away from her, but she shifted to block his path. You think you could just play happy family here and forget what you walked away from? Some things don't stay buried, darling. From her bench, the woman in the housekeeping uniform could see the exchange, though she couldn't hear the words. She saw the way the stranger leaned in, the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders squared like a man ready to fight. Her instincts prickled. This wasn't a casual meeting. The boy's laughter from the carousel snapped him back. He turned his back on the woman in red, walking toward the ride just as it slowed to a stop. The boy ran to him, holding out a brass token the operator had given him. Look, I get to go again. That's great, he said, forcing a smile. But his eyes betrayed him. They were darker now, clouded with something she couldn't name. When the ride was over, he suggested they head back. The boy didn't protest, though he looked disappointed. On the walk home, he said little, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. At her door, she asked, "Who was she?" "No one you need to worry about," he said, too quickly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're bringing people from your past into my son's life. That's something I need to worry about." He looked at her for a long moment, then simply said, "Not yet." That night, she lay awake replaying the scene. The image of the woman in red burned into her mind. She didn't know what had happened between them, but she knew it wasn't finished. And deep down, she feared whatever shadow this woman carried was about to reach her door. The following day at the hotel began like any other, her hands numb from wringing out wet cloths, the smell of cleaning solution clinging to her skin, the steady rhythm of her cart wheels on the polished floors. She tried to lose herself in the work, but her mind refused to let go of the scene at the park. The image of the woman in red was lodged in her thoughts, the sharpness of her tone echoing in the back of her head. By mid-afternoon, she was dusting the wide window ledges in one of the empty suites when a soft knock came at the door. That in itself was unusual. Guests rarely visited housekeeping mid-shift. When she opened it, her breath caught. The woman in red stood there. Up close, she was even more striking, though her beauty had the kind of precision that suggested calculation rather than warmth. Her eyes swept over the modest room, then settled on the woman in the housekeeping uniform with a smile that didn't reach them. "You're harder to find than I expected," the stranger said. Her instinct was to shut the door, but she forced herself to stand firm. "Do I know you?" "No," the woman replied smoothly. "But I know him." The air in the room shifted instantly. "If you have something to say, say it." "Oh, I have a lot to say," the stranger continued, stepping inside without an invitation. "But I'll keep it short, since I'm sure your shift is busy. The man you've been entertaining? He's not who you think he is." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what I think." "I know enough." The woman leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "You think he came back for you? For the boy? You think you're different from the others? Trust me, none of us were different." The words were like tiny shards of glass, each one catching and tearing. "What do you want?" "A warning," the stranger said plainly. "There are things about him that don't go away, no matter how much time passes. People he's crossed, promises he's broken, and debts that don't just disappear." She stared, her heart pounding. "And you? Which one were you? Someone he crossed, or someone he promised?" The woman's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Both." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "If you came here to scare me, you wasted your time." "Oh, I'm not here to scare you," the stranger replied, turning toward the door. "I'm here to make sure you're ready. Because when the past catches up to him, and it will, you and your boy will be standing right next to him." She didn't move until the door closed behind her. Only then did she realize she'd been holding her breath. That night, she waited until her son was asleep before picking up the phone. She considered calling him, demanding answers, but she stopped herself. If she confronted him now, he'd find a way to twist it to shut her out. She needed to hear the truth without giving him the chance to hide it. The next day, she followed him. She waited outside the hotel until he emerged, dressed sharply again, his expression unreadable. He didn't notice her as she trailed him through the crowded streets, keeping her distance, moving when he moved, stopping when he stopped. Eventually, he entered a quiet cafe on a side street, the kind of place where conversation stayed private. Through the window, she saw him sit across from a man she didn't recognize, a man with a face like weathered stone and eyes that never smiled. The conversation looked tense. The stranger leaned forward, his jaw working as he spoke, while the man she knew kept his expression tight, nodding occasionally but saying little. Then she saw it, the envelope. The stone-faced man slid it across the table, and he hesitated before taking it. Whatever was inside, it wasn't a friendly gesture. She left before the meeting ended, her mind spinning. That envelope, the woman in red, the shadows in his eyes, they were pieces of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to solve. But now, she wasn't sure she had a choice. She didn't sleep that night. The hum of the refrigerator in her small kitchen seemed louder, the tick of the wall clock sharper, each second dragging her deeper into a restless haze. Her mind kept replaying the image of him in that cafe, the envelope sliding across the table like a silent threat, and the look on his face controlled, but tight, as though his every breath was measured. By morning, she'd made a decision. No more guessing. No more half-truths. She waited for him in the service corridor of the hotel, a place where guests never went and the walls smelled faintly of bleach. It was narrow, with a single overhead light that buzzed faintly, casting a dim glow over the linoleum floor. When she heard his footsteps, she stepped out from behind the doorframe. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but firm. He slowed, surprised, but didn't stop walking. "I'm busy." She moved to block his path. "Make time. Unless you'd rather I ask my questions in front of the entire lobby." That made him pause. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then gave a short nod. "Fine. 5 minutes." They ended up in one of the smaller meeting rooms on the ground floor, the kind used for quick business calls. The space felt too quiet, the air heavy between them. "I followed you yesterday," she began. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I saw you meet a man at a cafe. I saw him give you an envelope. And before that, a woman came to see me, a woman in a red coat who says she knows you." Something in his eyes flickered at the mention of the red coat. "She said you have debts, promises you've broken, people who haven't forgotten. And she told me that when they come for you, they'll come for anyone standing next to you, including my son." He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose as though weighing his next words. "You think I'm dangerous." "I think you're hiding something," she replied. "And I think whatever it is, it's going to hurt us if I don't find out now." He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on a point just past her shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, stripped of the easy confidence he usually wore. "There was a deal. Years ago, before I met you. It was supposed to be clean, simple numbers, quick profit. But the people I worked with, they weren't the type you could walk away from without paying a price. I made money. More than I should have. But I made enemies too." She felt a coldness spreading through her. "And now they've found you." "They never stopped looking," he admitted. "But lately, they've been closer. That man at the cafe? He's their messenger." The envelope was a reminder. A deadline. Her throat tightened. "A deadline for what?" "To pay," he said flatly. "Or to watch them take what matters most to me." The words hung between them, heavy and poisonous. She felt her stomach turn. "And what's that supposed to mean? Are you saying—" "I'm saying," he cut in, his voice sharp now, "that I can't let them know about him. If they find out I have a son," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Her mind raced. "So that's why you came back? Not because you wanted to see him, but because you were already running?" His eyes locked onto hers, the muscle in his jaw twitching. "I came back because I couldn't keep running. And because, yes, I needed to see him. But now, more than ever, I need to protect him." She let out a bitter laugh. "Protect him? By dragging him into whatever mess you've made." "I didn't want this life for him," he said, his voice breaking slightly, just for a moment. "I don't want him to know who I used to be." She stared at him, the silence stretching between them until it was almost unbearable. Finally, she stepped back toward the door. Maybe it's too late for that. She left without waiting for him to answer. In the hallway, her legs felt heavier than they ever had. She wanted to believe he was telling the truth, but all she could think about was the red coat, the envelope, and the way danger seemed to follow him like a shadow he couldn't shake. What she didn't see was that upstairs, in his suite, he was already on the phone, his voice low, telling someone to move the meeting up. His eyes were cold, focused, and the way he gripped the phone made one thing clear. Whatever deadline he'd been given, it was closer than he had let on. 2 days passed without a word from him. No visits, no calls, no unexpected appearances at her apartment door. At first, she thought the silence might bring her relief. But the absence had its own weight, pressing into her until she caught herself glancing at the clock and wondering where he was. By the third night, her nerves were frayed, and her sleep was shallow enough that every sound from the street pulled her to the window. It was early morning when she finally saw him again. She had just stepped out of the hotel service elevator with the cart stacked high, with fresh linens when he appeared in the corridor, moving with purpose. He was in his suit again, the one that always looked like it had been tailored around him, but his eyes were harder now, colder. "We need to talk," he said. She didn't move. "Funny. Last time we talked, You left me with more questions than answers. I don't have time for this, he said, already glancing down the hallway toward the stairs. But you should know, I'm meeting them tonight. The people I told you about. The ones who want their money. Her chest tightened. And if you can't pay? He looked at her for a long moment, the silence answering her more clearly than words. Then he added, I don't want you at the hotel tonight. Take the boy and stay somewhere else. I'm not going to run just because you tell me to, she said sharply. His voice rose slightly, breaking the usual controlled tone. This isn't about running. It's about staying alive. He didn't wait for her response. He moved past her, the faint scent of his cologne trailing in the air, and disappeared into the stairwell. That evening, the city was wet again, the streets reflecting the dull glow of street lamps. She told herself she'd stay away, that she'd take her son to her sister's apartment and pretend this wasn't happening. But as soon as she put him to bed, her curiosity and fear clawed at her until she found herself walking back toward the hotel, her jacket pulled tight against the rain. She knew where he'd be, one of the private lounges upstairs, the kind reserved for guests who could afford discretion. She kept to the shadows, staying close to the walls, until she found the door slightly ajar. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. He sat at a round table across from three men she'd never seen before. Their suits were expensive, but not new, their watches gleaming in the low light. The man in the middle leaned forward, speaking in a low, steady tone that carried across the room. You've had more than enough time, he said. We don't care about your excuses. We care about results. I'll have the money, he replied, his voice calm but tight. The man on the left smirked. You'll have it, or we'll take something worth more. Her skin prickled. She didn't like the way the man said it, the way his gaze drifted toward the window as if picturing something or someone far away. How long do I have? He asked. The leader leaned back, his fingers drumming slowly on the table. 3 days. Midnight. And if I pay, then we forget you existed, the man said, his smile cold. But if you don't, well, let's just say you won't be the one who pays the real price. Her breath caught. She wanted to step into the room, to demand they leave him alone, but she stayed still. Any sign that she was listening could turn their attention to her and to the boy. He didn't argue. He only nodded once, then pushed back his chair. I'll see you in 3 days. The men rose and left without another word. She waited until their footsteps faded before stepping into the doorway. You weren't supposed to be here, he said, not even looking surprised to see her. I heard enough, she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. 3 days? What are you planning to do? Handle it, he replied. She took a step closer. Handle it how? You don't have that kind of money, do you? He met her eyes, and for the first time, there was something almost like defeat in his expression. No, but I have something else they want. Something they'll take instead of money. Her stomach twisted. And what's that? He didn't answer. He brushed past her, his shoulder barely grazing hers, and she realized that whatever plan he had, it was dangerous enough that he didn't dare tell her. When she returned home, she checked on her son, finding him curled beneath his blanket, breathing evenly. She sat on the edge of his bed, brushing the hair from his forehead, and felt a surge of dread so sharp it made her chest ache. Because now, more than ever, she knew, whatever he was about to give them, it could very well cost him his life. And if he failed, they might not stop with him. The next morning, she woke with the uneasy certainty that something had shifted. The apartment felt colder, quieter, as if even the air was holding its breath. Her son was still asleep, curled up with his blanket clutched to his chest, but she lingered in the doorway, watching him a moment longer than usual. The memory of those men's words, the way they had said, "We'll take something worth more," looped through her mind like a curse. She dressed quickly and made her way to the hotel before her shift officially started. She wanted to find him before he left for whatever reckless plan he was concocting. But when she arrived, the concierge told her he had checked out at dawn. Did he say where he was going? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. The man behind the desk shook his head. No, but he left this for you. He reached under the counter and handed her a plain, white envelope. Her fingers trembled as she slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short, hurried message. Stay away from the hotel for the next 3 nights. Keep the boy close. Don't ask questions. No signature, but she didn't need one. She stuffed the note into her pocket and walked back outside, the morning sunlight doing nothing to ease the chill in her stomach. Every instinct screamed that waiting and obeying wasn't an option. She needed to know what he was walking into, because if he failed, she needed to be ready. That afternoon, she retraced her steps from the day she had followed him to the cafe. She didn't know exactly where to start, but she had a feeling. The man with the weathered face from before, the one who had passed him the first envelope, was there again, sitting at the same corner table. This time, he wasn't alone. The woman in red was with him, her legs crossed elegantly, her smile like a blade. They didn't see her as she lingered outside, half hidden behind the awning of the shop next door. She couldn't hear every word, but the woman's voice carried in sharp fragments. "He's stalling. Not what we agreed. There's another way." The man leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "We don't touch the boy unless he makes us." Her breath caught, and her stomach lurched. She pressed herself against the wall, every nerve in her body on fire. The woman in red glanced toward the window as if sensing something, and she quickly stepped back out of sight. They were after her son. She didn't wait for them to leave. She turned and hurried through the streets, her thoughts racing faster than her feet. She needed answers, and she needed them now. That night, when her son was asleep, she made the choice she had been avoiding. She went to the one place she swore she'd never go, his old apartment. She'd learned the address months ago from a piece of discarded mail in the hotel trash, but she had never used it. The building was nothing like the hotel's grandeur. Dark brick, narrow hallways, the smell of dust, and something stale clinging to the air. She climbed to the 3rd floor and found his door slightly ajar. Inside, the apartment was sparsely furnished, as if he had never intended to stay long. On the table by the window lay an open briefcase. Inside were stacks of documents, an unmarked black phone, and, tucked into a corner, a photograph. It was the 3 of them, not posed, not formal. Just a fleeting moment from the park, her son laughing as he held the model car, the man crouched beside him. She didn't even remember anyone taking it. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. She turned toward the door just as he appeared, his expression hardening when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" "I know," she said, her voice shaking. "I know what they want. I know they'll use him if he can't pay." He closed the door behind him, running a hand through his hair. "That's why I'm handling it." "How?" she demanded. He looked at her for a long moment, then crossed to the table and picked up a folded sheet of paper. "They don't want money anymore. They want me to take something from someone else. Something only I can get." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And if you don't, then they take him," he said, no hesitation in his tone. "Which is why I'm not giving them the chance." The finality in his voice chilled her more than the words. She wanted to believe he had a plan that wouldn't cost him everything, but his eyes told her the truth. Whatever he was about to do, there was no guarantee he'd come back from it. She didn't wait for morning. The moment she left his apartment that night, she knew she couldn't let him face whatever this was alone. Not because she trusted him entirely, but because she didn't trust the people he was dealing with. She told herself it was for her son's safety, but the truth was more complicated. Back home, she barely slept, lying fully dressed on the couch with her coat still on, listening to the ticking clock until the first light of dawn crept into the room. She left her son with her neighbor, a woman who owed her enough favors not to ask too many questions, and slipped out into the still damp streets. By the time she reached the edge of the business district, she spotted him. He was across the street, leaning against a sleek black car, checking his watch. His movements were sharp, impatient, his eyes scanning the road. She stayed back, letting a delivery truck pass between them before following at a distance. He drove to a part of the city she rarely saw, a place where the sidewalks were cracked, the buildings older, the shop windows dusty with neglect. She watched from a block away as he parked outside a narrow building with boarded-up windows. There was a steel door at the entrance, no sign, no name. He knocked once, waited, then knocked again in a specific rhythm. The door opened just enough to let him in. She crossed the street and slipped into an alley that gave her a view of the building's side windows. Inside, she could see faint movement, shadows crossing behind grimy glass, shapes that blurred and reappeared. She shifted to a better angle and caught a glimpse of him in a large, dimly lit room. 3 men stood around a table littered with papers and black cases. The air inside looked heavy, the kind of place where every conversation was a negotiation and every handshake carried a hidden cost. One of the men, a tall figure with a shaved head and a gold watch, slid a folder across the table to him. He opened it, scanning quickly. Even from where she stood, she could see the stiffness in his shoulders. The man with the watch spoke, gesturing toward the folder. His lips moved slowly, deliberately, as if ensuring every word landed. She could read enough of his expression to know this wasn't just about stealing something valuable. It was about betrayal. Whoever they wanted him to target wasn't random. A smaller man at the far end of the table chuckled, shaking his head. The gold watch man silenced him with a look, then leaned forward again. This time, his voice rose enough for her to hear faintly through the cracked window. The woman and the boy insurance. Her heart pounded, a rush of cold shooting through her veins. She knew instantly who he meant. He said something in return, sharp enough that the men exchanged glances. His hands were on the table now, leaning in, his jaw tight. For a moment, it looked like the tension might break into violence. Then, just as quickly, he stepped back, closed the folder, and gave a single nod. She ducked into the shadows as he exited through the same steel door, the folder tucked under his arm. His face was unreadable, but his stride was faster, more urgent. She followed him back to his car, careful to keep her distance. He drove toward the waterfront this time, stopping in front of an abandoned warehouse. The way he glanced around before stepping inside told her everything. This was where he was going to do whatever they had asked. She slipped in through a side entrance, keeping low behind stacks of rusted barrels. Inside, he was already moving through the shadows, heading toward a small office at the far end of the space. Through the cracked glass of the office door, she saw another man waiting, older, dressed in a way that suggested power without effort. The older man's gaze hardened the moment he saw him. Words were exchanged, sharp, loaded, and then he slid something small but unmistakably heavy across the desk. It took her a heartbeat to realize what it was. A gun. Her stomach twisted. The older man's voice was low, but she caught enough to understand. You do this, and they'll leave you alone. You don't, and they'll come for everything you've ever cared about. He didn't answer right away. His hand hovered over the weapon, his eyes distant, as though he could already see the cost of picking it up. She wanted to rush in, to pull him away before he could make a choice that would drag them all past the point of no return. But before she could move, he closed his hand around the gun. Her breath caught, because in that instant, she understood, whatever he was about to do, it wouldn't just decide his future. It would decide hers and her son's as well. And from the look in his eyes, there was no turning back. The gun felt heavier than it should have. He stood there, staring at it, his fingers curling around the cold metal as though it could burn him. The older man watched him without blinking, his expression carved from stone. You do this, the man said slowly, and your debt is gone. You don't, and will collect in ways you won't like. He didn't answer immediately. In his mind, he saw his son's face, bright, laughing, clutching that model car like it was the most valuable thing in the world. He saw her standing in the doorway of her apartment, eyes guarded but still soft enough to let him in. And then he saw the other version, the one where her eyes were wide with fear, her arms wrapped around their boy as strangers closed in. He placed the gun back on the desk. I'm not doing it. The older man leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Then you're choosing the hard way. So be it, he replied, his voice steady. But if you touch them, if you even look in their direction, I will make sure you regret it. The man chuckled, shaking his head. You've grown bold in your desperation. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out of the office, his steps quickening once he hit the warehouse floor. But as soon as he stepped into the open air, he knew he wasn't alone. She was there, standing half in shadow, her coat pulled tightly around her. Her eyes were fixed on his empty hands. You didn't do it, she said, her voice unreadable. "No," he replied, "and now they'll come for me." "For you," she repeated, "or for us?" He hesitated. "I won't let them touch you or him." She stepped closer, her jaw tightening. "You keep saying that like you can control what happens next. But you can't, not if we stay here." He wanted to argue, to tell her he could fix this, but he knew the truth. Staying meant giving his enemies the advantage. Leaving was the only way to take it back. "They'll follow me," he said quietly. "Then let them," she answered, her voice steady now. "Just not to him. Not to us." For a moment, they just stood there in the damp night air, the sound of the water lapping against the pier carrying faintly in the distance. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small key. "It's to a storage unit," he explained. "Everything I've left is in there. It's not much, but it's enough to start over somewhere else. If you'll let me." Her brows drew together. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I trust you more than I trust myself right now," he said, and for the first time his voice carried no defenses, no sharp edges. They left the waterfront together, keeping to the quieter streets. At her apartment, he lingered in the doorway, as though stepping inside would make everything harder. "You don't have to stay," she told him. "I know," he said, "but I want—" Her son stirred from the couch, rubbing his eyes. "You're here," the boy murmured sleepily. He crouched beside him, brushing the hair from his forehead. "I am, and I'm not going anywhere again." She watched the exchange, something in her chest loosening for the first time in days. She knew the danger wasn't gone. Men like the ones at the warehouse didn't forgive or forget. But in that moment, with him kneeling beside their boy and the weight of his choice still fresh between them, she also knew something else. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were deciding to fight together. When he stood, their eyes met, and for the first time since his return, there was no space between them, no fear sharp enough to keep them apart. His hand brushed hers, tentative but certain. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we face it as one." She nodded, and the tension that had lived in her shoulders for a year seemed to ease. As one. Somewhere in the city, the people he had defied were already moving, planning their next step. But here, in the quiet of her small apartment, with the rain beginning again outside, they allowed themselves a moment of stillness. A moment that felt almost like peace. It was the kind of moment you held onto because you knew it might have to carry you through the storm that was still coming. And yet, for the first time, she believed that love, unexpected, unwanted at first, but undeniably real, might be enough to weather it. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. And sometimes, in the middle of the storm, we discover that love, pure and unshaken, is the only anchor we have. No matter the enemies, the debts, or the shadows from the past, there's a greater hand guiding our steps. Maybe you call it fate, maybe you call it God. But when two hearts are meant to stand together, no darkness can truly tear them apart. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because you never know which story might be the one you needed to hear today. And now tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this video? I can't wait to read your answer.